Members, I've just been told the live stream's now working. Members, Councillor Mrs Page has just pointed out that in the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of February 2024, it has their Councillor Mr Lambourne, and apparently it should read Councillor Mr Linden. Can I have a show of hands? Everybody agreed with that amendment? Thank you very much. That's amended. I'm going to go back to the agenda and introduce agenda item 6 again, the Mill and Arts and Events Centre update, and Emily Ewell, our director, will introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, our Director of Assets and Investments, who has prepared this report, is not able to be here this evening. Therefore, I will be introducing the report and attempting to respond to any questions. The purpose of the report is to give an update on the Mill Hall Arts and Events Centre, as it has been over a year since the ONS committee last had an update. The report provides an update on progress with the recommendations made by the ONS committee members and explains how the full council decisions made on the 7th of September 2023 have now superseded some of those recommendations. As you can see from the report, there are many positives about how the venue has operated recently under the management of our in-house team. Admittedly, there have been some frustrations with delays to essential works to the building, but the increase in bookings and the refurbishment of the bars have been a great success. We are planning to undertake the market research work in the new municipal year, as it's not appropriate for the council to conduct consultations that could be politically sensitive during the pre-election moratorium period. This research will be essential to informing the options appraisal and business case for the future longer-term operation of the Mill Hall, which will be presented to the full council in due course. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions or comments from members. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lambourne, please.
Thank you, Emily. I have a series of questions which I did circulate earlier. Have you seen them? Okay. Right. First one being I'm concerned about marketing research has not been started. I know you just made a comment about PERDA. This should have been done months ago. But without the market research, the council has not agreed an operating model, and this report doesn't discuss the various options for what an operating model could be. Why has that been delayed? In my opinion, this should have been the priority as to how we can move forward. Until we have an idea of the customer demand and the shape of the operating model, not just the Mill Hall, but the other leisure assets throughout the district, in particular the Rayleigh Leisure Centre, Clements Hall, Castle Hall, and those that are still closed assets like the Freight House and Wakering Leisure Centre. My second question, why are we addressing...
Councillor Lambourne, would you like them answered individually? Will that be easier? Because I know you have got a series of questions from the PME.
Thank you, Councillor Lambourne. I would suggest that officers are also frustrated that market research hasn't been undertaken to date, and that is simply a matter of resourcing, both in terms of having the resources in the leisure team to write the spec, so they've been called in the kind of operation and covering shifts to actually run the Mill Hall, but also the kind of commissioning support that we need around that. So we are doing the work to have that procured so that we can go out to collect that market research as soon as possible in the new municipal year. And of course, as you say, about this report doesn't cover options for the operating model because we need that meaningful market research to inform those possible options.
Okay.
Did you want to come back on that question at all, Councillor Lambourne, before you go on to your next one?
Will the market research cover all the leisure assets?
The two leisure centres, Rayleigh Leisure Centre and Clements Hall Leisure Centre, are currently part of the piece of work to review the leisure contract. So there will be separate market research around their use as part of that process. The council in the budget discussion did allocate some funds towards researching options for assets in the west of the district, particularly around the Freight House. So it may be that we can cover both assets in this piece of research. But I think the important thing is that this committee and the executive are both committed to meaningful market research about the operation of the Mill Hall, and we need to make sure that the focus of that exercise is really on this building.
I disagree with that. I think there should be all of them, but anyway. Right, which leads to my next question. Why aren't we addressing market research across all aspects of the council? There are many areas that we need resident input, but this seems to be an activity taken in single silos based on individual budget allocation. RDC needs to create a process where we can get being used for all consultations.
Chair, I'm happy to respond to that question. I think I've answered that in part in my previous response. But what I would also say is you've got another paper on the agenda tonight about engagement, and it's a scoping document for this committee to undertake a review of engagement. And there's no reason why our approach to consultation couldn't be included in that review of engagement activity undertaken by the council.
Okay, but you're still going to go with individual silos as we are at the moment. But we can discuss that later. Okay. Right. The current operations ignore the fact that the Mill Hall is being used for council meetings, and this again is missing from the short-term finance implications. There should be an internal cost transfer between the democratic services to the asset portfolio. As previously we were hiring Swain Hall, for instance, Swain School. So what I'm saying is we're not seeing the true financial picture because we've not got the cost of using this place for council meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Lambourne. Emily will answer that one.
Yes, thank you for that question. So it's true to say that the council doesn't currently show an internal recharge between the assets team and the democratic services team for the cost of hosting meetings in this venue. However, I can advise members that the commercial cost for hiring the mill for an evening is £364 for 7 hours. So that's the cost that could be apportioned to each council meeting held here. So it's something that we can take forward in terms of showing that in the relevant budget lines.
So will you republish the figures you've got in here, taking that into account?
No, because they're a retrospective look.
Well, that's what you put in there. It's a retrospective look. Okay. 4. There is no mention of the kitchens. Previously, we had a fully equipped kitchen for caterers. Why aren't there options for this to be reinstated, particularly as part of the operating model?
Thank you, Chair. The use of the kitchen will be considered as part of the longer-term future operating model, and obviously that will be balanced in any business case against any cost of refurbishment. What we really need to understand is there a demand for a commercial kitchen of that size and that nature with that equipment in it? And some of the things that we're hearing at the moment is there's a kind of trend towards kind of pop-up catering when people have events, so they will bring their own caterers in with food already cooked. But obviously we need to consider that as part of the whole piece.
In that case, we need to think about heating ovens and warming ovens. Without the required operator model, we seem to have been taking decisions to separate the cafe, the hall and bars into different offerings. Having not agreed an operating model, how can we do this?
So any decisions that are taken around interim arrangements for operating any of the facilities in this building have to be done bearing in mind the commitment that the executive made to bring any future longer term operating options to the full council for decision. So that's why any decisions that have been made about opening the bars, for example, or leases for tenants have to be on a short-term basis, because the executive doesn't have the authority to take longer-term decisions. So the things that have been put in place, like the bars, we can do that without creating a longer-term commitment on the venue.
So what is the length of that arrangement with the bar?
I believe it's on a rolling licence arrangement, but I'd have to check that out.
Okay.
Members, could we please not talk while the questions have been asked? Thank you. Councillor Lambourne, carry on.
All right. When Fusion were excluded from the management involvement, why didn't they make financial reparations to the lack of maintenance? As part of their exit, why wasn't there a conditional survey as a part of their exit arrangement? I suspect it was excluded. So who made that decision to waive their responsibilities to the upkeep of the assets we have been paying them to keep in good order?
Chair, as you can imagine, that's quite a difficult question to answer in the context of the meeting. But what I have got, which I'm quite happy to share with Councillor Lambourne and other members of the committee, is a decision-making history for the Mill Hall and decisions that were taken about responsibility for maintenance and also the waiving of any of those responsibilities. So I'm quite happy to share that, but I can't read it all out tonight. It's several pages long.
Okay. And my final question, which you haven't had, within the document you've outlined, Phoebe has outlined various risks. Why isn't there a risk about the reopening of the Civic Suite and/or another venue to host these council meetings rather than doing them at the Mill Hall? If we don't get somewhere else to host these meetings, it puts the whole of the Mill Hall in jeopardy.
Yeah. Okay. Emily will answer that question. That's your last question, isn't it, Councillor Lambourne, I believe?
Yeah, for the moment.
Chair, the location of council meetings, or indeed the operation of the Civic Suite, isn't part of this update to the committee this evening. So that's why it's not been included in this particular document.
As a risk,
But I'm quite happy to take away any comments from members or any recommendations from the committee about that.
Thank you. Councillor Ward, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chairman. It's actually two. One is going back to one of the first answers you gave to Councillor Lambourne. And this is not wishing to put any words into your mouth whatsoever, but you mentioned the word lack of resource because unable to be having completed the this particular exercise. Now, as I say, without wishing to put words into your mouth or anywhere else, could this be because of the change of administration? Because a lot of resource might have been used and put away. And could you explain, if that is not the reason why there is a lack of resource, what is the lack of resource in not completing this part of the project?
I'm happy to answer that question, Chair. The lack of resource is down to the very small team that operates this building, sometimes 7 days a week, and has to cover a variety of shifts. So there's been a period of time when we haven't been fully staffed. We haven't had all of the duty managers in place. And so the likes of Mark Aldous and Kieran, who have managerial responsibilities and would be contributing to producing that specification for the market research, have been covering other activities such as just keeping this venue open and accessible for the public.
Did you want to come back, Councillor
If I
Ward?
may, yes.
And don't forget, please, everyone, that we are talking on this paper. Thank you.
I'm only talking on this paper, nothing else. Again, it's a pity that extra resource was not found to actually complete this exercise. I'd like that to be noted and just understand why it hasn't been. If I just go on to my second question. Now, this is a wee bit speculative, I guess, but we're looking at figures within this about the costs and such like of running this establishment. And we were asking for a business model. But what would be a simple case and a simple idea would be to understand what would be the ideal income for 100% usage, 100%. So literally every day, every moment, this building is in use. Now, I wouldn't expect that to happen because that would be pie in the sky, I think. But I just wanted to know what would be the ideal amount that could be accrued by 100% against the current costs of maintaining this building. Thank you.
Councillor Ward, as with all members of overview and scrutiny, I do ask for questions to be submitted before, especially if they're of a technical nature or where an officer needs to find the figures. I will ask our officer, Emily, but I'm almost 100% sure she probably can't answer that now, which is a shame it wasn't put forward before. Emily.
Chair, you have absolutely read my mind, but Councillor Ward, I will take that question away, and I think the point is you're asking for what would be the peak income generated or the peak income possible against the maximum utilisation of the asset.
Thank you. Is that all your questions? Yep. Councillor Mrs. Belton, please.
Thank you. Nothing quite so complicated as that one. Just going back to the market research, and I appreciate it's already been picked up a few times, but just a couple of points. The commitment was made to do it, so I do believe we should have found the resource. Creating a set of questions shouldn't be too onerous. I know the technical, the tourism team and leisure team work exceptionally hard and do a fantastic job, but I wouldn't have thought it would be too onerous. But that actually leads me on to my original question was, who is going to determine the spec of these questions? Because it's quite important that they are pitched not too biased one way or the other, and that we're actually gathering the information we need district-wide, because I believe when this point came forward, it was made very clear by a number of councillors that it had to capture everybody in the district, not just people on this side, and not just residents, also businesses and so on and so forth. So it would be interesting to see, will we see that consultation before it goes out to agree, or will we just see the results when they come back? And secondly to that, how long will the consultation last? Because obviously it's been delayed, which we understand why, disappointing as it may be, we understand that. But how long will the consultation go on? Because we know how long things take in council, and if it's going to be out there for 6 months, we're looking at least another year before anything happens. So just sort of understanding that ideal timeline would be useful. And then I just have one more question, but I'm happy to, do you want to answer that one first? And then I'll...
I think so, please, Councillor Mrs. Belton. Emily.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to caveat the response to your first part with, I think this is the case, but I will go and double check. I believe there was a delegation to the director in consultation with the lead member to agree the content of the consultation document, but I will check that for you and come back if that's not the case. With regards to the length of time, I'm not entirely sure that that has been specified at this stage. So again, I'll need to take that back.
And you've got one more question, Councillor Belton.
Just coming back on that last point very quickly, will we have the opportunity to define a time like we did with the cafe soft marketing? We asked for a time limit just so that we can't see this kind of drift away from us. Deadlines help focus us all to to get to the end goal. So I'd be interested to see if that could happen. My second question just relates actually to the soft market, the 6.62.10, to the cafe. That concluded in November, and I read what it says, and that's all absolutely fine. We talk about investment to bring it up to a satisfactory standard. Now, if I recall, and I think it's P&C, so I won't talk about the figures, but a figure came forward in the September report about how much would need to be invested to bring that up to standard. Has any work been done to justify that figure yet, or are we still working to that assumption that that amount is what's needed? Because I was unhappy with that amount. I didn't agree with it at the time, but I haven't seen anything to substantiate that figure. And I just wonder, has any work been done to put us in a better place to understand how we bring that cafe back to fruition?
Sorry, Emily, if you want to pick that one up.
So just coming back to the length of time for the consultation, there is no reason why this committee couldn't make such a recommendation this evening. But I will just point out that one of the aims of the consultation was to ensure that we got to engage with a minimum of 2,000 residents. So I'd just be mindful of not putting a timescale on it that didn't enable that reach. But there's no reason that this committee couldn't make a recommendation about that length of time. With regards to the cost of refurbishment of the kitchen, I believe we're still working on the figures that we had back in September. What we have had now, though, through the soft market testing, is a bit more of an idea from an operator about that minimum works that would need to be undertaken, and whether it would be possible for somebody who was going to occupy in a short term to want to put that investment in. And the answer around that was absolutely not. We would need to put that investment into refurbishing the cafe as the owner of the site.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Gadsden.
Page 6.3, 1.11, and it's regarding the working group, the cross-party working group. I gather that's been set up, but I haven't heard any update on the progress or meetings, and I was wondering if I could have a little bit of information on how that's going along.
Emily will answer that one.
Thank you, Chair. There is a strategic assets working group, which is an executive working group. It has not met to date.
Is there any particular reason why it's not met to date?
Chair, there hasn't been business for the working group to discuss at this stage.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question, if that's okay. When we're talking about the marketing, it also says that on number 5, it says that during the process, external funding options are being investigated. Is that still on schedule to happen at the same time as the market research?
Sorry, Councillor
It says
Gadsden,
that
can you
during the
just give me-
process, sorry, number 5, external funding options are investigated either by RDC or a partner of the works needed.
Thank you, Chair, for assisting me, and thank you for repeating the question. So that was one of the recommendations from the committee. I'm just trying to track whether that was then taken forward by the executive at the time. I believe, remembering from discussions, that the executive then was in support of course, trying to lever in external funding options. It is something that we continually look for, and actually across the council, obviously, we look for grant funding opportunities, anything that comes out of government in terms of additional funding streams, and we would continue to look for anything that could be applied to this building.
So, Emily, can I just ask if you've actually identified anything at the moment?
Again, I'm afraid, Councillor Mrs. Gadsden, you know what I'm going to say. This is a question where our officer may not be able to answer on the spot.
I do appreciate
Okay.
that. And
Emily, are you
able
able to assist with that question?
I'm quite happy for Emily to get back to me. And Chair, I do apologise. I was away, so I was unable
I
to
understand
attend the pre-meeting.
that will be
But-
fine, and Emily
okay,
will circulate
That's
any funding
perfect. Thank you,
streams
Emily.
that we've applied for. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a matter of clarity, I've heard the comments on staff resourcing, and I'm sure that members of this committee are well aware that staff resourcing is a matter for the CEO, and I'm sure that officers will report back to him the concerns that have been expressed today, and he will take any action that is appropriate or necessary. Apart from that, as this report makes quite clear, full council has already determined the way forward. This administration inherited this position, which left it in a difficult situation of either re-evaluating or continuing with the approved plans. It was determined to continue with the approved plans despite the high revenue costs. And I'm pleased to see in this report that there's been a substantial increase in the revenue that officers and members have managed to achieve by the operation of the building. The next step is, as has been clearly put in the report, is to establish whether a substantial commercial operating model can be obtained. And I'm pleased that this will be undertaken after the elections to remove any speculation during PERDA. Market research is skilled. It is very important that this is right. It should not be rushed. It should be done properly by skilled staff. And I'm pleased that this will be done in a timely fashion. And I'm sure that the report, once we have it, will go back to the appropriate committee with all due speed.
Thank you. Have you any other questions, Councillor Mrs Mason?
No, thank you.
Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I can cover a few points. The old chestnut has come up and it's been reported time and time again, and I think people hope for a different answer. But when this building was handed over from Fusion, or they were released from their requirements to manage it, we as the then administration were absolutely assured that all of the repair and maintenance requirements in the building had been fully met, because it was a key point. Now, look, there's always a bit of a debate because over a period of time, things wear out. And I'm thinking immediately of the fire system, which failed a month or two ago, the lift. And it's always a matter of debate as should that have been kept in better order? And I accept there is that grey area. But really, we need to sort of move on from that because, as I say, assurance was given by professionals. There were professional architects that looked at it. So I just wanted to make that point. Look, it's in a way refreshing, but also very frustrating that things haven't moved along. And my sympathies are with the current administration because I know just what a difficult nut this one is to crack. Because actually everyone wants to achieve a really good and positive outcome. But it is a difficult nut to crack. And my sympathies are with the current administration and having been there myself. In broad terms, let us not overlook the fact that we actually, when we were in administration, did do some considerable market research, and that was reported through the working group at the time. I forget, probably called it the ADP working group or the Mill Hall working group or whatever. And that was actually conducted by an expert consultant. So whilst I look at 2.11 and agree all the points in there, I don't actually see any significant difference from the market research that was conducted under our administration. So I'm just wondering whether we're going dancing around and trying to get different answers to the same question. And that's a rhetorical question. I'm not expecting an answer on that point. My next point is the fact that when you look in 2.14, to get feedback from 2,000 residents out of a population of 86,000, I don't think is particularly representative. But having said that, we'll probably hear later on, it is sometimes difficult to get engagement. So I also accept that point. But I would like those 2,000, if that's the best we can do, to come right across the district. Because I think it's important that people in Wakering, and I'm picking Wakering because that's the most sort of easterly point that I can think of, but you've got other outlying areas there as well, that they realise that they are as an important part of this district in terms of their contribution to making this place work. And looking at some of the figures, clearly it is for any administration of the day to decide how much that they will subsidise a community facility. But let's not overlook the parlous state that council finances are in across the country, and some difficult decisions have to be made. But when you actually look at 340,000, if I can remind members that that's way in excess of the amount that we put up council tax for all residents in the district. So I make that point, the 2,000. When I look, and I sat in this building last night, and it was really a delight to actually hear a community group really enjoying themselves. So that is really positive. Then you look at the fees and charges, which was recently published in the budget, and I look, and if I'm correct, for the first hour they would have been paying £33 and subsequent hours £18. And I'm giving figures that are in the public domain, so they're not, and good luck to them. Why wouldn't you hire it? But then when I actually look at the heating costs, the running costs of 2 members of staff, I really am not surprised that we're not managing to sort things out. It's a difficult nut to crack because we want to attract people. And sometimes you have to have lost leaders. 2.16, I would be interested to know whether there's an outcome on the roof survey, which it says has been conducted. That would be helpful. And that's my lot. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't think there was too many difficult questions in there, but it was a few statements. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Booth.
Just want to come back to the point that Mrs. Gadsden made regarding the cross-part working group. So Emily, what's the phrase? This asset strategic steering group? Was that the phrase?
Strategic asset working group.
Well, nearly there with that. So is that the same thing, or was the same intention as the cross-party working group for Mill Hall?
Yes, the strategic asset working group remit includes all of the strategic assets owned by the council, of which this would be one of them.
Right, because I get the sense reading this, the working group was really going to be focused on Mill Hall. And I think if that had been in operation, we wouldn't be hearing so much of the frustration that's coming from members this evening. I do believe it does need to be a cross-party working group. And I don't want to sound like President Snow from the Hunger Games, but also Pan District as well. And as vice chair of this committee, I'm slightly concerned that a recommendation made by this committee, endorsed by the executive, hasn't been enacted, and therefore we're left with the frustrations that have been voiced this evening. Because I think Councillor Belton's point of the consultation, who's going to decide the questions, that could have been a focus for this cross-party working group. So I'm just wondering, Chair, how do we actually make sure this cross-party working group does indeed meet and is enacted and is initiated and is fair? Pan District has a representation of all those people that have a real working concern that this is a success for the local community. And I think that's more important than sometimes the minutiae of the finances, because surely as a district, we're here to provide some services for our residents. And this is a key service that wants to be provided, but we must look beyond Rayleigh for that as well. And I take the substance of Councillor Lambourne's questions tonight. It's got to go beyond Rayleigh as well. So my question is, how as a committee do we ensure that something we asked for almost a year ago that has been endorsed by the executive actually takes place? Chair.
Thank you. Emily.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just switch hats from responding to this report and put my governance hat on. This committee could make a recommendation about establishing a working group that was specifically focused on the Mill Hall. What I would suggest, committee members, if you were minded to do that, and bearing in mind you do have another committee meeting before the end of this municipal year, is you make an in principle recommendation to do that this evening, and then we go away and work up some terms of reference for that working group and bring them back to your next meeting for you to agree. That could then feed into the annual council meeting, and the council can appoint that working group, because of course we will move into the committee system from May, so there will no longer be any executive working groups. But I think to achieve your aim, Vice Chair, of having something that's got real kind of tangible outcomes to it, this committee making recommendations about the operation and about the terms of reference for that working group would be the most appropriate way forward.
I just want to ask a question on that, Emily. Is there any quicker process? Because the longer we delay some of this work, the longer it will take to have the meaningful market research done. For example, if we made a recommendation, could it not go to executive next week and a committee formed post that? Because even during Purdo, it should be business as normal for the work of the council.
Yes, the committee could make a direct recommendation to the executive, but it would then still be an executive working group. So just to bear that in mind, and obviously would then need to be transferred into a different format post-May. The other option is, I think members have been made aware that there will be an additional council meeting in March. So the committee could consider an urgent recommendation to that full council meeting in March.
And Councillor Booth.
Yes, thank you for that, Emily. I'm just keen that this committee actually puts some timescales to this, so it does actually happen, because this was agreed by us over a year, well, almost a year ago to the day. So what I would like to see is that there's an agreement from this committee that the first party working group to consider Millhall, or an appropriate body that does that, I'm still quite naive in all these things, Emily, I must admit, does meet in the month of June. So actually we can move forward with this, because I think that gives us enough time to get the elections over, but actually that the first initial meeting of this group to consider Millhall does take place in the month of June. To me, that seems a fair timescale, if that seems fair to you, Emily.
Post the rest of the questions, I think we'll have a short recess, and perhaps then there could be some collaborative recommendation that is put forward. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Yes, before we recess, I'd like to, well, I have other comments I'd like to make, but I'd like to comment on what you're considering now. The office has already said that the cross-party working group hasn't met because there is no work for it to do at present. The work has been gone at pace and has been led by the lead director and the director of assets, and they've been working very hard on this. So I don't think it's a reasonable criticism. And unfortunately, I can't say too much because, as some of you will be aware, a lot of the information is in exempt. But I can assure members that work is going apace, and it's just not at the moment widely known.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. It wasn't intended to be a criticism. It's just the fact that as Vice Chair of this committee, I'm concerned that a recommendation that was made over a year ago that's been endorsed by the executive doesn't yet seem to be enacted. So what's the point of me giving up 2 hours of my time at these meetings if those recommendations aren't enacted? I'm just really keen that members are representing their residents in a pan-district cross-party working party, because I do strongly believe that lots of the things that have been suggested tonight and the frustrations that have been raised could have been put to bed if we'd got this cross-party working group up and running.
I will say that the cross-party working group has been appointed. It's just waiting for something to do. That isn't in exempt.
Thank you. I believe that work has already been recognised tonight that could be done. Hence, there's quite an enthusiasm I can feel for getting this working group up and off the ground, and especially if it's pan the district. It's Councillor Milne first, please. Councillor Mrs Boughton.
Yeah, this will be pretty brief. With regard to the market research, which Emily might be able to answer this, there's clearly two tranches of this and how we task the researchers. One is the community aspect, and it has been mentioned that it's a bit of a bargain, this hall, which it is, but it's not going to be in its final form, perhaps, when all the work is done, and we have to set that against whatever the competition is, to be economic about it and to be fair to residents. But the main money-making part of this hall, the commercial end, where ticketed events can occur in the right setting and the required work, there are clearly two work streams that are going to come out of this research. So we need to have those clearly sort of separated, because the community aspects generally during the day and weekdays and the evenings. And of course, the commercial stuff, when something that's going to sell tickets that are seriously valuable tickets, hopefully in a Palace Theatre kind of range of income, would perhaps turn this place around. But we need to be clear about how we task those people that are going to deal with this, and then separate that out, because we really have to look after the communities. And the other thing is, I do agree, we have to look at this whole thing when we get on to the end of this meeting about deciding how we're going to make this district-wide and expand how we're going to tackle all of that. That's my request. So is that the way we're going to go about it?
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Yes, we have a recess at the end of this to formulate a recommendation, but Emily will come back to you on your other comments.
Thank you, Chair. In 2.14 of the report, it does talk about the engagement and the consultation not just being with residents and stakeholders, but also understanding the viability of the Mill Hall and whether it can be self-funding. And actually in the consultants report that Councillor Wotton alluded to earlier, there was some analysis about how this building could operate and whether it could be competitive with some of those other larger venues that put on the likes of professional shows. So some of that work has been done already, but obviously we need to assess that again in the current economic climate. And obviously there's a bit as well, and sorry, Councillor Wotton, I didn't have a chance to come back to a comment you made, but absolutely there's that kind of balancing act about attracting people in at a cost that's reasonable, and that may need to be subsidised. So it may be a kind of longer term process to get to the point where we could host some of those bigger shows, or we could command higher, higher costs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason, you've got a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to what Councillor Wotton said, just for clarity. I understand his frustration with the figures and the amounts that we're charging, and I can understand that. But I would remind members that this was opened by the previous administration, and the only alteration that has been made is an increase for inflation. They are the basically the figures that the previous administration put in, and I can understand how frustrating and difficult it is, because and it was for them as well.
Councillor Wotton, did you want to come back on
Thank
that?
you very much indeed, Madam Chair. Look, just to be absolutely clear, I think a bit of clarity is required. I didn't say I was frustrated. I think it's bargain basement time for some of the organisations. I think it's absolutely great. But the tough decision for the current administration is the degree to which they are accepting of the subsidy. And at the present time, we're looking at figures, and I appreciate that they may vary, that this hall is being, or this building is being subsidised to the cost of £340,000 in revenue terms, and we made £250,000 by increasing our council tax a week or two ago. That is the proportion of it. But I'm not frustrated. I think it's great news, really.
Members, if we can keep, if we, no, I'm sorry, Mrs Mason.
It's 240,
Mrs Mason,
not 340.
Let the officer respond as opposed to members. We are the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We leave politics at the door. Please, members, we're talking about the paper that is in front of us tonight. Councillor Sparing.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm really following along, sadly, the same lines as a lot of the other speakers about the frustration of these issues. A lot of this work of soft marketing has been done, reports have been submitted, but they all seem to have been shelved and are subsequently being started up again. As you've highlighted, Mr. Booth, Councillor Booth, sorry, there's no deadlines on anything. It's all just drifting along. And being very cynical, I might suggest it's all being pushed along after the elections because some of the things that are beginning to show up.
No, sorry, we're going into the realms of political talk, so. no.
Well, Chairman, I'm just suggesting why it's being delayed.
Perhaps we can have a recommendation then that it does progress.
Yes, certainly.
But I do have to draw the line. We're here to debate this paper, please. Councillor Mrs Belton.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming back, I think Councillor Booth made some fantastic points that resonated with a lot of us around the table. And hearing Councillor Mrs Mason's points about the fact that a lot of work is going on in the background at pace, which I don't dispute is happening. I'm sure that is happening, and I'm sure the councillor involved is working very hard because they know the importance of this. I think possibly part of the issue is, as members, we don't know what is going on. And the report that has come forward, and I don't want to criticise a report when the officer that wrote it isn't here, but actually it gives us a lot of information about what this committee asked for and what the executive agreed, but it doesn't give an awful lot of detail about what has happened since, other than the marketing hasn't happened, a roof survey has, but with no outcome. The cafe soft launching has happened, but again, not much real detail about what the conclusion was. So I can understand why people are frustrated and think that nothing is happening, because this report doesn't really tell us an awful lot. And I appreciate stuff isn't exempt, so that's why it couldn't, but potentially we could have still seen exempt updates. And all it really gives us is a financial update, which is a positive one from the last, but already Councillor Lambourne has found a flaw in it, in that £376 per meeting. And bearing in mind, we have quite a lot of meetings in this hall, that could actually be bridging that gap if it was reported, and it hasn't been. So I do understand the frustrations. I do think we need to find a way forward. I hear what Emily has said about the fact that things are changing. We can make recommendations now that become null and void in a matter of 8 weeks. So I think it's important that we all sort of get our heads together and make a positive recommendation. But I completely hear the frustrations, and also probably the frustrations of the lead member that isn't able to deliver what she's, or report maybe what she's wanted to report this far.
Thank you. I can see no other members indicating.
Madam Chairman, I did ask about
The figures?
2.16. That was the roof survey, sorry.
2.16.
I don't think we ever covered that one off.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the reminder, Councillor. I've made a note to go back and ask if we can share that with members.
Thank you. Now, I've just got a few notes that I'd like to mention. Page 6.5, I just want to draw your attention, top of the page, C. It says there very clearly, the operating model of the Mill Hall Arts and Events Centre must strive to be commercially viable, reducing the level of subsidy that the council is required to provide. Now, that is key to whatever we move forward with this item. Page 6.7, again, I understand exactly where the office is coming from, and consultations cannot take place during the PERDA period. However, I don't believe that work can't start. So again, the recommendation, we can have a thought about the wording there. I am also for consideration that within that wording, with the reach that we're going to go out in any consultation, 2,000, that is a small percentage of our population, but that it should be pan the district. And page 6.9, if we just turn to there, there's 3.4, if I can just read that out. No, actually not 3.4, forgive me, and with a further 845,000 allocated for 2024-25. I wonder, and the officer will have to respond to this one, if we can have an addition in there, this is subject to the operating model providing a sustainable business model, words to that effect. Because when I questioned that at full council, I was assured that that capital spend was based on the fact that we needed an operating model coming forward that met our needs. So if Emily can answer that one, please.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'm afraid, committee, I'm going to give you a slightly woolly answer because I believe some of those capital costs are necessary works just to maintain the condition of the building. And then there may be other works in that total sum that are optional depending on the final chosen operating model. So I'll have to take that back, Chair, to give you a firmer answer.
Thank you. Well, that reaffirms the need to progress this as soon as possible, because my calculations with the additional money that was budgeted for the further 2 years was over £1 million budgeted, which is, I believe, around £11 per person for our population. So we do have to take this rather seriously, members. So if we can pause our meeting and go into recess and perhaps look at a recommendation and then come back onto live stream. further, please. Are we on? So, members, we've been debating and we now have a recommendation on the floor. Councillor Booth.
So in the interest of collaboration and for the communities we serve, I'd like to propose that a cross-party working group is appointed by the council at the annual council meeting in May 2024 to act as a steering group for matters relating to the Millhall Arts and Events Centre, and the officers prepare a proposed terms of reference for this working group to be presented to the annual council meeting, and that the first meeting of the working group should be held in June 2024.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Wotton. So, members, you have a recommendation proposed and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you, members. That concludes item 6. Councillor Mrs Belton.
Sorry, I may have misunderstood, but I thought I was able to put forward another proposal for within the report. So aside from the working group.
Of course you can, Mrs Belton. No.
Yeah.
Councillor Mrs Belton.
Thank you. I'll try and get the wording right. So I'd like to propose to the lead member for assets that the marketing research is concluded by September 2024 to be presented to the next meeting of this working group, or the working group that we've just formed for review. And that is on the basis that that starts early May and that gives 16 weeks to bring it to conclusion.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for that?
Councillor Mason wants to speak.
Councillor Ward. Does anybody want to speak on this recommendation? Councillor Mrs Mason.
Sorry, we've just asked for terms of reference and now we're trying to tie the working group's hands. I think it would be up to that working group to decide the timescale that they want to receive things in. I feel that it's wrong for us to set the date arbitrary now, and I think it should be left to the working group, which I'm quite happy with. Meeting in June, they can easily set it for September. But we've got no terms of reference, and we're also predetermining what the working group is going to do. And let's have a proper cross-party working group and let them determine their way forward. Thank you.
Councillor Sperrin.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought we got a working group put together, cross-party, that's never met yet. So if there's no incentive for them to meet again, we'll end up in the same position, surely.
Councillor Mrs Belton.
Thank you. Whilst I completely understand what Councillor Mrs Mason is saying, the intention here is to ensure that this moves forward, because my concern is if the working group isn't meeting until June, we could find ourselves in a position where actually that market research doesn't even start until June, which is the holiday period. Then we end up getting the data back at Christmas. And I'm just concerned about the timings, because we're already, as Councillor Booth pointed out, 1 year on from when we recommended this, and we will be 1 year on from executive recommended it in September. So I understand, I don't want to tie anybody's hands to anything, but I think dates are focusing. They allow us to focus and look for a conclusion. And I think September is reasonable without tying anybody's hands. And if the working group meet in June and strongly disagree with the recommendation that's going to the lead member, then that will be a decision for them to discuss. But at this time, I would like to see us put some focus on the research. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Booth.
Yeah, just like to come back to Councillor Mrs Belton's point there. I mean, I'm reassured by what I've heard from Mrs Mason, Councillor Mason this evening, that things are moving forward very quickly, but for a whole variety of reasons that hasn't necessarily been shared. I don't think it's anything treacherous or underhand or Machiavellian. It's just sort of the situation that we're in with regard to legal requirements and everything else. And I would certainly hope that the meeting in June would not be agreeing the consultation, but be seeing how the consultation is moving forward and taking some initial findings from that consultation. So I have every reassurance that things will continue to move, but now this working party will be a way of communicating that with all members, and also members ensuring that there are timelines and deadlines that are actually kept to, so the point of this committee is actually met.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Belton, would you read your recommendation again, just so that we can then take a vote on it? Thank you.
I was going to say, Emily, did you make notes? I'll hand over to Emily if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation is to the lead member for assets, and it's that the market research is concluded by September 2024 and the results reported to the next possible meeting of the working group after that date.
Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Tell me when you're done. Yep. All those against, please raise your hand. And anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Thank you, members. That recommendation's also carried. Have you a recommendation, Councillor Mrs Mason?
I'd like to make a point, if I may, that you've made a recommendation and voted on it for a lead member to do something post the annual council. We won't have lead members then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Mason. Councillor, right. Yeah, of course. Emily will just clarify that for us.
Chair, I think it's worth just making a point of clarification that reflects the conversation that the committee had earlier, that the work to develop the spec for the market research, which will set the period of time, is being done this side of the municipal year, which will be relevant to the lead member taking a role in that. It's the kind of actual conduct of the research itself that falls after the new municipal year, at which point the council moves into the committee system and the lead member role will not exist anymore.
Thank you. There is the recommendation as set out on page 6.1 of the report that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee review the updated report within this report. So we've done that. There is no voting required. And added our recommendations. So we're moving on now, members, to agenda item 7, improving access to affordable credit and financial services for low-income households via credit unions. I would like to invite our Director, Steve Sumners, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. This report is before the committee tonight following a motion that was approved at Ordinary Council on the 14th of December 2023. The report sets out the role of the council in helping to protect its residents by improving access to affordable credit and financial services for low-income households via credit unions. There are 5 recommendations in the report tonight, and these are set out on the top of page 7.2, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Gadsden.
In the report, prior to the report, when we had our meeting at full council, one of the things that came across was the need for maybe some financial support for the credit unions to get up and running. It wasn't a large amount, it was only a small amount of money, but I can see nothing in this report that points to that.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, R4 probably could have enlarged on that a little bit, but R4 takes the implicit nature of that in looking to review what we can and can't do. The financial piece would be part of that review, but you're quite right. That proposal that was brought forward was quite minimal. And based on that, I would suspect that we could probably find monies that in budgets that are already in existence that could cater for that. But part of that, we just need to do that due diligence with anyone who came forward in that process, just to make sure we could do that.
Thank you. Can I just come back? I thought the report was actually excellent. Sorry, I thought the report was actually excellent, and I'd like you to pass on my thanks to the officer that had written the report. Can I just ask if we could maybe suggest a slight amendment to R4? Reason being, it starts with review, but it doesn't feel like there's a commitment after the review. So I'm wondering if we could change the wording to a review with the intention of how the council could support. I was wondering if members are happy for that amendment.
I'm doing it now. You'll need to propose that recommendation.
I'd like to propose that recommendation.
Thank you, members. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wootton will second that. Are members happy with that recommendation? Would you like to read it out in its entirety, please, Councillor Mrs Gadsden, before we
So-
vote on it?
R4, the review with the intention of how the council could support with providing community access points or facilities that could be utilised by credit unions to support the delivery of face-to-face services in our communities.
Thank you. All those in favour, members, please raise your hand. All those against, please raise your hand. Thank you, members. And are there any abstentions? Thank you. That recommendation's carried. Councillor Mrs Gadsden, did you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Councillor Wootton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm smiling because before the meeting I whispered to Councillor Gadsden that I thought a amendment to R4, and I read out my words, but she's very eloquently said it for me, so I'll miss out that point. But I did certainly want to say I think this is an excellent report, and as Councillor Gadsden has said, via Mr Summers, perhaps that could be fed back, because I think it was really well put together. I would have liked to have met Eugenie Minogue, but in person, not here, but I wanted to be able to say it to their face. So well done, super report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo that. I mean, I've read this report. I have had some at length dealings with credit unions in the past, not permanently, but in a professional capacity. And this report actually sums it up very well. I think it's something that the council should be doing, to signposting this to facilitate our members. And again, I think it's an excellent report. It's nice, actually, to receive a report that we don't have to pull apart. So compliments to the officer. Thank you.
Members, are there any other members wishing to speak on this item? Then members, on page 7.2, we have 4 recommendations. Are you happy that we take them on block? Thank you. Then I move them from the chair. Have I a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mr Milne. Members, all those in favour? It's unanimous, isn't it? Thank you, members. That's unanimous. That's. Sorry. Was there something? Okay. Any members against? Any members abstaining? Thank you very much. Members, agenda item 8, the scoping request to review consultation and engagement. I'd like to invite our Director, Greg Campbell, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Before you is a report that asks you to endorse the scoping document that looks at the engagement and consultation strategy. The work we're looking at is to make sure that we have a strategy that is uniformed, coherent, and that means that when we go out to consultation in the future, we get better responses on which we can make decisions. The scoping document is before you in Appendix 1, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Greg. Members, have you any questions for Greg? Any comments on the report? Councillor Mrs Mason.
Again, I wouldn't think I'd say this twice in one evening, but a very comprehensive report. It's something that I think is well overdue. I welcome it, and I hope that it's enacted sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. So the recommendation is on page 8.1. Recommendation 1 and 2. Is every member happy that I take them on block again? So again, I'll move from the chair. Have I got a seconder, please? Councillor Ward. Members, all those in favour? I'm not declaring until you tell me now. I believe that one is unanimous. Thank you, members. Greg, Steve, would you like to go? Members, agenda item 9, key decisions document. Members, please indicate if you'd like to raise anything on the key decisions document. I'll take my time, allow you to flip through it. No one is indicating. Therefore, I will see everybody is happy with the key decisions document. So moving on to agenda item 10, the work plan. Members, are there any comments? Anything anybody wants to add to the work plan or discuss? Councillor Mrs Page.
Last meeting that Councillor Bob Milne asked for the Finchfield and Dutch Cottage to be added to the plan.
Oh, I did, yes. They reminded me.
Could you please record that? That it's recorded, Councillor Milne, and apologies that it wasn't on there for you. So it will be added to the work plan moving forward. Any other members got any questions or anything to add to the work plan? That then, members, concludes our meeting for this evening. Thank you very much and a safe journey home.